Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to No Food Live. I'm your host, Matthew Lang, joined by my co-host, Courtney Riggle, here on my left. We're in the 6th episode of the No Food series, where we take a deep dive into the world of food informatics and the Internet of Food. We air the third Thursday of every month, but you don't have to remember that. You can just click right down below and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Hi, everyone. We're so pleased to have you join us today. And as Matthew mentioned, our 6th episode already. So, wow, the year is going fast. All of the previous episodes are available for streaming if you missed a live broadcast. And we're really excited to have this one today. Today, we follow closely on the 2-part series we just completed on food composition in April and May to look more deeply into nutrition.
Hang on. I have a good one. A computer scientist, a nutritionist, and a medical doctor walk into a bar. No, they don't, because there's a pandemic and all the bars are shut. They're here today on No Food to talk to you and to us about some amazing stuff. We're going to mash up food, nutrition, and health recommender systems. So stick around, everyone. I can't wait to get into this.
We'll be starting our conversation today with Dr. Robert Lustig, Professor Emeritus at the nation's top research hospital, University of California, San Francisco, and a specialist on childhood obesity and diabetes.
And second up today, we'll have Africa Sullivan, a professor in the School of Agriculture and Food Science at the other UCD, that is University College Dublin, where she's also the Dean of International Programs. I don't think we've had a dean on our show yet, Courtney, have we? We are moving up in the world.
So. Right on. We'll also be joined by Deborah Mcginnis, a renowned computer scientist at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Poor little Wrens, they get slayed. I'm sorry, Deborah. So, who is a global leader in development of ontology languages and one of the world's foremost semantic web researchers.
All right, let's get started. First up, we have Dr. Robert Lustig, MD, an emeritus professor of pediatrics in the Division of Endocrinology and a member of the Institute for Health Policy Studies at UCSF. Dr. Lustig is a neuroendocrinologist with expertise in metabolism, obesity, and nutrition. He's a thought leader in the anti-sugar movement, authoring popular books like Fat Chance, The Hacking of the American Mind, and his just released book, Metabolic, The Lure and Lies of Processed Food, Nutrition, and Modern Medicine. Dr. Lustig joins us today to talk about the technical tools enabling support for precision nutrition at the consumer level. But before we start, let remind our live stream audience that you can type your questions down below and we will see and respond to them live. So, Dr. Lustig, Rob, if I may, it's really a pleasure to have you here today. Let's see, you've got a new book out. You're a chief medical officer of a couple different companies. You've got your finger on the pulse of how food systems are changing. Please indulge us. What's going on?
I wish I knew. Thank you, Matthew. There are so many different people working in different directions. Sometimes I feel like what we need is a coxswain to keep all the oars going in the same direction. My talk today, very quickly, is called Reinventing Personalized Nutrition. But since personalized nutrition hasn't been invented, how can we reinvent it? Aren't I getting a little ahead of myself? Well, the reason is because no one's got the whole pie. No one's got the key to the kingdom. But there are components out there that could all be melded together to make something work that actually could make personalized nutrition work. And my goal is to try to broker those partnerships. And we've done so with 5 different entities that you can see on the slide right now. And I'm going to go through why each of these are important really quick. Now, this is sort of well known to your audience, but I'm just going to make it very clear. We are dealing with 2 inconvenient truths in this chronic metabolic disease and health span issue. Number one, there is no rational medical therapy to reverse chronic metabolic disease. I take care of type 2 diabetes in children. I take care of fatty liver disease in children. Children never got these diseases before, but they just keep getting worse despite all of our efforts. And the reason is because there's only long-term treatment. There's no reversal. And the reason is because all of these diseases are not druggable, but they are foodable. And that leads us to the second, which is you can't fix healthcare until you fix health. You can't fix health until you fix diet. And you can't fix diet until you know what the hell is wrong and for which patient. So what's the solution? Well, we've put together an interdisciplinary digital/in-person platform that would tie together metabolic, nutritional, behavioral interventions and monitoring. It would tie together a group of stakeholders that have never been tied together before: the patient, the doctor, the dietitian, the grocer, and the insurer. And it would only allow for the choosing of food that promotes the health of the patient. It would be personalized health content, food, cooking, coaching. It would provide 24-hour availability. It would capture data in a HIPAA-compliant fashion, consistent with existing electronic health records and not dependent on the internet, so that poor people could access this too. The first of the 5 in the consortium is Foogle. Todd Noble's the CEO, and I am the Chief Medical Officer. What it allows for is the ability to access individual foodstuffs in the supermarket without actually having to know what's in the foodstuffs in order to be able to make appropriate recipes. So, for instance, let's say you had metabolic syndrome and gout and kidney stones. All right, that means you need to be on a low refined carbohydrate, low purine, and low oxalate diet. How would you know what foods to buy for any given recipe? So let's say you wake up in the morning and you say, I'm hankering for chicken cacciatore for dinner. You type chicken cacciatore into Foogle's platform, and then everything happens like magic. The first thing that happens is that the database accesses your biochemical profile to determine those 3 filters and puts them in place. This low refined carbohydrate, low purine, low oxalate. Then the Foogle accesses 1 million recipes, of which about 20 or 30 would be chicken cacciatore, finds the one with the lowest refined carbohydrate, purine, and oxalate. Would then go to your supermarket and look for the ingredients that were necessary for that recipe and look at all the SKUs in the supermarket to figure out which foodstuffs had the lowest refined carbohydrate, purine, and oxalate. Only order those. Place an order for that. They would show up at your door with the recipe, and then Foogle would charge your insurance company for the price of the meal, because after all, the insurance company would rather pay for food than for insulin, which costs about 10 times as much. This all can be done because of a database platform called Perfect, which is a criteria-based recommendation engine that applies personalized filters. And so you can extract data on food product information in this interlocking database, and it integrates with any store or delivery service or mobile app. So basically, you can put in whatever filter you want, and right now we have 300 filters attached to Perfect, which can basically screen out for any individual person's needs. In addition, digital content has to be supplied to those patients based on their disease process, and that can be done through ConnectWell, so that this is science-based, expert vetted, and hooked to your biochemical profile. Because if you have celiac disease, you don't need to know what's going on with somebody else with inflammatory bowel disease. You need to know what's going on with celiac disease. They're not the same. All of this can be integrated under an aegis such as Simplex Health, which basically is a dietary interactive behavior change platform, particularly with respect to diet, which tracks activity of meals, blood glucose, and connects virtually with a medically supervised care team. And finally, this can be done within a hospital system, such as, for instance, Holy Redeemer in Philadelphia, where we are piloting this, which is a community-based, population health value-based, multi-specialty group that can provide ambulatory and behavioral health services. How do you integrate it? Well, I'm going to show you. This is the integration here on this slide. As you can see, it's got all of these consortium members and collaborating entities. It is adaptive and scalable. It has a consortium interface. It is patient and consumer focused, and that's the most important thing. But it is driven by your own individual biochemical / behavioral profile. And it allows for a user interface that only is necessary. It only provides what's necessary for you rather than for everyone else. So you see your own provider. You don't have to change providers. You then meet with a simplex research dietitian who can generate that online biochemical profile. The specific food filters can be applied, and then the patient has access to all their own data. And so that, ultimately insurance funded grocery delivery, the food bill is charged to the insurance company. The patient receives their own content and can connect specifically with a health coach. So it's a win for the patient, it's a win for the doctor, a win for the dietitian, a win for the grocer, and a win for the healthcare payer. Basically, everyone wins except for the big pharma, because we won't need their medicines when it's all done. So with that, I'll close and be happy to take any questions.
Wow. Thank you, Rob. That's a pretty amazing consortium of partners you've brought together, that's come together in this. Just wondering, well, you said it's in the pilot phase right now in Philadelphia. Yes. What's kind of the rollout plan for this tool? And then kind of a part of that is, how excited are the insurance companies about this new opportunity?
Well, so the insurance companies have told us, almost, uniformly, they want a product, not a project. So we basically have to provide data to show that it works before the insurance companies will come on board. All the insurance companies are very interested, and none of them want to come on board until they know it works. So we have to actually provide the data. It's a real catch-22 in that respect. It's one of the reasons why you haven't heard about it yet. So we are piloting it. We are doing it without the insurance company on the front end. So we're doing it, without the recompense from the insurance company. That will ultimately be the last thing to be added in because of their reticence. So that's the problem. The rollout is taking place, within these already built health systems, Holy Redeemer and Simplex Health. And so we are basically adding in Perfect, Fugal, and ConnectWell into an existing healthcare delivery model that already works. So that's the rollout. That's
great. Look forward to seeing that progress. But let's shift our focus now to our next guest, Dean O'Sullivan, Afric. Afric O'Sullivan is an assistant professor and associate dean for international programs in the University College Dublin School of Agriculture and Food Science, and part of the Institutes for Food and Health. Her research involves application of metabolomics to explore responses to diet, lifestyle, and interventions, and personalizing food based on strategies to achieve a healthy, sustainable diet. In particular, she uses twin studies to examine the impact of genes and environment on diet and metabolism and the interaction of both. So, Dean O'Sullivan, Afric, can you tell us about your current work and thoughts on enabling personalized food strategy kind of based on some of these other aspects?
I can. Thanks, Courtney, and thanks, Rob. That was a nice introduction. And I suppose what I'm going to talk to you about would feed into a component or is a component, I suppose, of what Rob was describing in that kind of pipeline to personalized nutrition. So broadly, my research tries to untangle some of the complexities of nutrition phenotypes to inform this kind of personalized nutrition strategy. So I'm going to focus on metabolomic profiles as an example of a complex phenotype and show how we use twins to help untangle that complexity within the metabolome, which can then be used to inform the personalized nutrition strategies. Like what Rob referred to, he talked about biochemical profiles. So the metabolome would be an example of a biochemical profile. So just to give you a quick background to the idea of personalized nutrition, again, which Rob has kind of touched on and talked about, but essentially in the past, dietary guidelines were based on the amount of a nutrient that we needed to prevent deficiency disease. And as research progressed, we developed food-based dietary guidelines, which typically took the form of a food pyramid, which you can see on the left here. And then more recently, we adapted those food pyramids into a kind of a food plate. And with those food plates, we started to incorporate things like age, sex, physical activity levels to make recommendations more targeted. But the application of new technologies, particularly the omics technologies, has changed how we approach nutrition research and provides us with a much deeper understanding of variation in response to foods and diets. And this has led to the idea that we can actually be more precise when it comes to dietary recommendations. And again, this brought about personalized nutrition, or what some will refer to as precision nutrition. So just briefly, a little bit of background on metabolomics specifically. It's just one example of a relatively new technology that we use quite a lot in nutrition research, but has potential to do more, both in terms of research, but also in the kind of public health or clinical practice, similar to what Rob described. So as you can see on the slide, metabolomics is the study of small molecules or metabolites in a biological system. And if you follow the sequence from left to right, you can see that metabolomics provides a readout of what is happening within the system. And it's a closer reflection of phenotype than genes or gene expression, for example. So the metabolomic profile is the result of the combination of a person's genes and their environment, and diet is just one component of this environment. And so we can gather quite a lot of information from looking at the metabolome. In nutrition research, we mostly use blood or urine as the biofluid of choice, and we use mass spectrometry or NMR spectroscopy as a method to generate the metabolomic data. So if you look at the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the spectra. The peaks in the spectra represent metabolites or parts of metabolites. However, generating these spectra is just the first step in a metabolomic study. We follow that with data processing steps. We identify metabolites, we look at pathways, but ultimately we end up with very large databases. So these are just two examples of papers that illustrate some of the applications of metabolomics in nutrition research. So the first is a study that compared metabolomic profiles of breastfed and formula-fed rhesus macaque monkeys. And if you look at the PCA scores plot on the left, each dot represents a metabolomic profile. So in this case, each dot represents a lot of data. You can see very clear separation between the breastfed and formula-fed groups, which suggests that there's quite significant differences in their metabolomic profiles. The second paper on the right then was one of the first studies to show links between dietary patterns and the urine metabolome. So you see in this scores plot that there were differences in the urine profiles depending on whether a person had a healthy or an unhealthy diet pattern, but notice the overlap between the healthy and unhealthy diet. Compared to the nice separation that you see in the breast and formula-fed scores plot on the left. So there's two important reasons for this. The first, this infant study is looking at the serum metabolome, whereas the dietary pattern study on the right is looking at urine. The urine metabolome has much higher variation, as expected. Metabolites are excreted in urine, whereas in blood, metabolite concentrations are typically kind of maintained within a homeostatic range. So we expect more variation in urine. Secondly, infants are consuming a milk-only diet, whether it's breast milk or formula, whereas adult diets are much more variable, and so we'd expect more variation in the metabolome as a result. But urine is an ideal body fluid for nutrition metabolomics research because it's non-invasive and it's relatively easy to collect. So we do need to try to understand what's driving this variation in the urine so that we can better use it as a tool in human nutrition research. So that brings us to the twin study design, and we designed a study in UCD called the UCD Twin Study. Twins are a really valuable cohort for looking at variation and examining the contribution of genes and environmental phenotypes in particular. So with the classic twin study, we recruited monozygotic or identical twins and dizygotic or non-identical twins into this semi-longitudinal observational study where we collected blood and then we collected urine, diet, and anthropometrics at kind of 5 time points over a 2-month period. And then we use what's called structural equation modeling to estimate the contribution of genes, which is the A component in the model that I'm showing here on the slide, shared environment, which is the C component, and then unique environment, which is the E component that I'm showing here. we did this using OpenMX in R. We also used NMR spectroscopy to generate our metabolomics data, and we used 24-hour dietary recalls to get an estimate of the twins' diets. So we generated a huge amount of data. I'm going to focus on a couple of key points just to try to keep to time. Before I move on, though, I just wanted to look at the sections of the NMR spectra that I've presented here on the bottom right of the slide. So what I've done here is I've overlaid monozygotic twins profiles and dizygotic twins profiles. And you can see that these parts of the monozygotic twins profile are almost identical. You can't hardly tell that there's two profiles on top of each other here. Whereas if you look at the dizygotic twins profiles, you can see some differences. And it's these similarities and differences between monozygotic and dizygotic twins that provide us with the foundation for this type of twin analysis that essentially allows us to separate out that genetic and environment component. Okay, so this is kind of just picking out some of those key findings from our study. The first result I want to highlight is we looked at how stable or variable the urine metabolome was over the kind of 2-month period. And we were able to show that about 20% of the urine metabolome we classified as stable. We then used a linear mixed model to estimate the contribution of different factors. So we looked at age, sex, body composition, and also diet quality. And as you can see from the slide again, age contributed to the biggest proportion of the stable metabolome, followed by diet quality, then sex and body composition, which contributed about 10% each. We also looked at the contribution of genes and environment and how this tracks through the time points. And essentially what we were able to see is that the impact of genes and environment that is present at baseline or at visit 1 tracks across the different time points. So it kind of contributes to that stable persistence across our time points. The last thing I want to touch on is just to look at the contribution of genes and environment to the covariation between diet and the urine metabolome. And I'm going to skip a lot of the detail in the analysis and just talk through one of the examples. In all, we identified 8 diet metabolite associations that were kind of stable over that 2-month period. But the strongest relationships were for saturated fat intake and whole grain intake. And these components were strongly associated with ketone bodies in urine. So the 2 ketone bodies are acetoacetate and beta-hydroxybutyrate. And so we showed that higher intakes of saturated fats and lower intakes of whole grain foods were associated with higher concentrations of ketones in urine. And we were able to show using the twin approach that the majority of this covariation or this relationship is explained by shared environment. So shared environment accounted for about 70% of the covariation between these diet components and these urine metabolites. So if you took this as just one example of a diet metabolite association, it suggests that experiences shared by twin parents together affect dietary intakes and metabolism. So just a final slide to summarize those key points. About 20% of the urine metabolome that we were looking at was stable. The urine metabolome we can confirm is a valuable proxy measure of diet and metabolism, and the diet metabolite associations that we looked at are reproducible over time, which suggests a stable underlying metabolic state that is associated with diet quality and potentially associated with diet from earlier in life. We can chat about that after the presentation. So what does this mean? Essentially, it means that we can see this type of metabolomic or metabolic profiling contributing to personalized nutrition strategies, or as I mentioned a couple of times through the talk there, kind of feeding into that system that Rob described in providing information along the pipeline from kind of patient to delivering personalized care. So that's it from me.
Wow. Thank you, Afrik. So this is very exciting, especially in the context of Dr. Lustig's research. And I'm thinking, so he's seeing clinical effects of arguably sugar. You're seeing from a laboratory metabolomics point of view. You called out saturated fat and whole grains, and so I'm wondering, how do we, do you know of advancements? How are we going to get to where we can look at some of these profiles in urine without maybe necessarily going to the clinic? Do you see a future where we have smart toilets, where we can guide people about what they're eating and what's happening in based on what they're excreting? Is that realistic?
I think so. And I mean, there's a lot of research being done looking at specific dietary biomarkers. So if I eat a piece of fish or if I eat broccoli or citrus fruits, I can pick that up in urine. And there's quite a lot of evidence now to show that even with, for example, some of the biomarkers of citrus fruit intake, that it actually, that you can quantify it to some extent in terms of you could allocate person to a high, medium or low citrus fruit intake based on their urine. But what I think is interesting about this work I've presented is that it gives you a sense that there's an underlying, so this stable metabolic state that I was kind of referring to or touching on, gives you a sense that there's almost like an imprint in your metabolism of what your kind of long-term or habitual diet has been like. So as well as seeing that kind of smart toilet being able to tell you what you've eaten like in the 24 hours beforehand, I see it, or I suppose my interest at least, is in the kind of effect that your habitual diet is having on your overall health, and are we able to kind of capture that in the urine sample? And from this research, it seems that we are. And I suppose what we're digging into then is what's driving that. So is it genes, or is it environment, or is it a combination of both?
Right. So this kind of reminds me, I think it was Bruce German who came up with that equation that essentially that your current phenotype is a result of your genotype plus, and we'll just talk about the dietary components, everything you've eaten up until today, including today. And that's basically what you're saying, right? And that bears out in the evidence of what you're saying.
Yeah, I guess so. And I suppose from the example that I showed there, and the fact that we're seeing shared environment as a strong contributor, that would suggest, so these are adult twins. So most, I would say, are not living together. So they're not living in the same household and necessarily eating the same foods for all meals. Most of our identical twins, and even some of our non-identical twins, they may have reported eating quite a lot of their meals together just because they generally spend time together. But there's a hint there, and we know it from twins research with children, is that kind of home environment in childhood and adolescence and early adulthood is playing a really important role in determining what that person's diet is going to be like through their lifetime. And I suppose from this research then, we're suggesting that has a kind of a longer impact on their metabolic health as well. So it's not just kind of what they're eating at the table when they're 10 years old.
Right.
That's filtering through their diet as they get older, but also their metabolic health.
Wow. Fascinating. Thank you so much. Now let's turn our attention to our final guest today, Dr. Deborah Mcginnis. Professor Mcginnis is the Tetherless World Senior Constellation Chair in Computer Science at Rensselaer University, Polytechnic University. For those who are unfamiliar with Tetherless World Constellation at Rensselaer Polytechnic, it's a constellation of multidisciplinary researchers who study the internal workings of the World Wide Web and the Internet itself. Professor Mcginnis is also the director and research scientist at the Stanford Knowledge Systems and Artificial Intelligence Lab. She's best known for her leadership role in semantic web research and for her work on explanation, trust, and applications of semantic web technologies and AI in science. Most recently, she's been involved in a project known as FOOD-KG. That's the Food Knowledge Graph, and you can find a link to the GitHub repository below. Dr. Mcginnis, Deborah, thank you so much for being here. You've done so many great things, including writing the de facto language of the semantic web, OWL, the web ontology language. And that seems to be what the semantic web is standardizing on. And now we have Food KG. Can you tell us a little bit more about why food, why ontology, why knowledge graphs, where do you see things going from here?
Thanks very much for inviting me and for that nice introduction. And actually, I do need to correct. I used to run the Knowledge Systems Lab at Stanford, but Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute lured me away to RPI. So I still maintain the KSL website there, but now I'm only at RPI. And wow, the previous speakers set this up really beautifully. So I'm going to talk about from my areas of expertise, from computer science and cognitive science and web science, trying to enable personal health. And I'm going to do that through our food knowledge graph example. So there's a project called HEALS, Health Empowerment by Analytics, Learning, and Semantics. And basically, we want to enable personalized precision health. Just a portion of it that I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about making some food recommendations as well as some explanations of the recommendations. Because if I just tell you to eat more broccoli and I don't tell you why, maybe you won't listen to me. But if I also tell you why and maybe use some of that metabolic information that we just heard about, and maybe use some of Rob's stuff as well, maybe you'll trust it more and make better decisions. But of course, there's a lot of challenges with trying to do that in a robust way. So we wanted to create a single, cohesive, integrated food knowledge graph. And that's going to be the back end that's going to help make the recommendations evidence-based, provenance aware. And we're doing this in an academic setting. So we're bringing together open source data, but I'm salivating over some of the content that we just heard about, wondering if I can integrate any of that into this food knowledge graph and the applications that use it as well. And we brought together initially a lot of recipes, nutrition information at a somewhat granular level, and then some standard food vocabularies, because we want to be interoperable and extensible. So one of the best ways to do that is understand what other people mean when they're using the same term that you're using. So we link to existing ontologies, and to answer briefly Matthew's question of why ontologies. Ontologies are a specification of the meaning of terms, so that you can interoperate using the same terms, or know when the same term means something different, and so that the computers can understand it as well as the humans. And then we also wanted to make it straightforward and easy to use and easy to extend. So this is open to the public. We'd love to have other people extending it, other people using it as well. So our initial content was a large recipe resource. This 1 million recipes. The USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture's nutrient database, background call, and the food ontology, FoodOn, and which is a field to fork ontology. So it has information about how things were grown as well as what's currently in that food, and additional information, some of which we don't use, like the packaging. Oops, I forgot this was iterative. So we need to create this knowledge graph, but creating it is a little bit more work than you might hope for. So you get some information, you get these spreadsheets with column headers that hopefully tell you what those column headers mean. This is an example from the USDA where we were pulling in nutrient information. And we want to connect that into our background ontology. So we use things like CHEBI, Chemical Entities of Biological Interest, SCIO, the Semantic Science Integrated Ontology, and a number of other kind of well-used open source ontologies. And then we extract the food products from FoodOn using a tool, OntoFox. We connect to a number of standard ontologies. And we do that through the semantic data dictionary approach so that you can actually connect kind of the column headers of a lot of different databases together and connect into these existing vocabularies so that ultimately we get what appears to be an integrated knowledge graph. And this is just a tiny little piece. I might want to ask, what the calories of something is, so I need to get that information in. And this is a joint project with IBM and Rensselaer. And then we don't want to do it in the absence of provenance, because if you're going to count on my information, you might want to know how recent it is. You might want to know where it came from. You might want to know who else trusted it. You might want to dig into the publications that, say, for example, Afric was mentioning, where you might want to get all those details. So it keeps track of the publications that it depends on as well. And also who and what created it. So some of this was done manually, but a lot of it was done automatically. And so when you're doing automatic extraction, you're not going to have 100% accuracy. So you might want to know what the reported accuracy of the algorithm is that we use to do some extraction. And all of that is maintained in the background knowledge graph. So you can answer a lot of simple questions like how much fat is in salted butter, comparison questions, which one has more fat, constraint questions. I want to get a recipe that has chicken, onion, and garlic. These are kind of the simple-ish questions. And we'll get into slightly more complicated questions, but ultimately, I want to have that smart toilet that we just heard about that says, maybe you ate too much of X the day before, and so, or your urine is showing a higher concentration of X. So what should I eat today that might help where I am? Or I've got some background condition. We're looking more at type 2 diabetes to motivate a lot of our questions, but there's nothing about this approach that's linked to any particular disease. And behind the scenes, no human needs to look at this stuff, but behind the scenes, we're using a standard query language, Sparkle, to ask questions like, get me foods with low glycemic index. And that might be just portion of a larger question, like, how can I modify some recipe that the ingredients all have, or together the recipe has a high glycemic index? What kind of modifications can I do to decrease the glycemic index of my choices of food? And then I don't want to just answer your questions, but I want to be able to explain something. So if I'm going to make a recommendation, and we've got a food recommender system, if I'm going to make a recommendation, I might say why I'm recommending it. So we leverage an explanation ontology that has different kinds of explanations. Today, I'm just going to talk very briefly about 3 kinds of explanations within a particular context, like within my preferences or my medical conditions, like maybe I do have an elevated A1C, or maybe I've got some other condition, or what if I want to do X versus Y? What if I want to have that chocolate cake or an apple for dessert? Well, what are the pluses and minuses of that? And what if some condition existed? What if I'm pregnant? Maybe I'm not going to eat sushi or something. So there's a black box recommender system, blackish, actually, it's kind of opaque, recommender system that pulled in all this content, keeping track of where it came from. There's a recommendation. And the content actually also includes clinical practice guidelines, the nutrition recommendations in the clinical practice guidelines for type 2 diabetes. And then we leverage the explanation ontology to give an explanation that's context aware. And we also use a background ontology, what to make. So I've got these foods in my house today. What kind of recipes might I make that are consistent with my interest and preferences? And then I might ask non-specific factors, what non-food specific factors contributed to a recommendation? So like my particular medical condition or my particular preferences, Or why did you recommend butternut squash over broccoli cheddar soup when you know I like broccoli and cheddar and I've got it in the house? Or what if I'm pregnant? Would you recommend something in particular? So the food knowledge graph, the food KG, actually we won an award for this at an academic conference. I mentioned earlier that I'm kind of salivating over that content that we heard about earlier today, because what we want to do is actually continue to grow this food knowledge graph so that it can be a back end that's making recommendations to how to live a healthier, more personalized, aware recommendation. So we developed this framework to ingest a wide range of data using background knowledge representation, semantics. We do depend on the web ontology language, although that's an open source standard that could be modified to put into other representation standards as well. We used extraction techniques so that we didn't have to do this all manually, and we created this coherent knowledge graph that is aligned with a number of well-used existing vocabularies, and that has been augmented to include explanation capabilities. And we talk about this in the Personal Health Knowledge Graph workshop. We've run a couple of those that coexist with the Knowledge Graph conference. We also talk about it in Common Sense Knowledge Graph references. I've included papers that I just barely touched on, the recommendations, the food substitutions, the knowledge graph process itself. And if you want to talk about how to build ontologies or how to keep track of the provenance in data science projects, those books are excellent as well. So I'll stop there and take questions.
Wow, that's super exciting. And actually, we have, thank you for your presentation, Deborah. We have you mentioned the food on ontology, and Damien presented on that on our first show this year. And coincidentally, he popped up a question for you that I think we should just ask now.
Cool.
So thank you for the question, Damien. So he asks, what is the gap between what food on and Chebby supply and the vocabularies, relations, etc., that you need to describe the food KB recipes and recommendations?
Yeah, so this is never easy. So KEBI, chemical entities of biological interest, is much more granular than our food entities. And so we heavily depend on use cases for figuring out how to scope what information we're going to pull in and how to do those mappings. We actually work pretty extensively with KEBI in multiple other projects, but one in particular that's an exposure and health project funded by the National Institute of Environmental Health Science, where I work with a bunch of toxicologists, epidemiologists, as well as some computer scientists to figure out how exposure to either the mother or the child or the mother or the adult impact health outcomes. And there we have to go down to more granular levels. We actually even go down to the metabolomics level in that project. So part of it is figuring out what level of granularity you want to connect on and what level of information you want to leave out for your particular application. And that takes, Matthew mentioned earlier that we are a very interdisciplinary constellation. I work with probably like 8 disciplines to try to figure out how things connect and what level of granularity makes sense. And there's no silver bullet there, Damien, I'm sure you're aware. Plus, we have background spreadsheets of use this vocabulary when you're trying to look at anatomy. Use this vocabulary when you're trying to look at exposure. And part of it is art as well as science, and part of it is machine learning based recommendations for mappings and then running it by humans. So we use a lot of semi-automatic tools with a human in the loop to verify things. And I think, and then we also run it by experts to check how good the mappings were, so that at least we keep track of that and we expose it.
So never a simple process, but one that sounds like you're really building. So that's great. So let's actually invite everyone back on stage here. Thank you all for those great presentations and opening to our discussion here. And I'm sure Matthew has a burning question ready to go.
Gosh, we've seen so much great material here today, and this show just keeps getting better and better. I don't think it's just that our guests just keep taking it to the next level. So it's fantastic. So we've got essentially 15 minutes left here in the hour to get at what do we think amongst ourselves here, and I'd invite the audience to contribute. We've had some suggestions that we need to get flavor into the mix. That we need to be able to, if we're going to personalize recommendations. Well, what is it you like to eat? I know that I don't like to eat a sandwich unless I've got something crunchy next to it. I like chips or crackers or something to go with my sandwich. So I think that there is a role for understanding what do people like to eat. We know that if we give people dietary recommendations that they don't necessarily like, they'll stick with it for about a month, and then go back to eating the same old stuff that they were eating before. I do appreciate, Deborah, that giving people a reason why you're recommending things. I think that that's a really important thing that I haven't really seen the literature go in that direction in terms of sort of explanatory recommendations at the moment that you're recommending it to them. Not necessarily, I think you should eat more fruits and vegetables and sort of leaving it at that, which seems to be the level of granularity that many food recommendation systems get to at this point. But I'm just going to open it up, and I'm not going to pick any one of you out. But where would you like to see this go next? What do you think is the most important next step towards personalizing dietary advice? And okay, actually, I'm going to start with you, Robert, because I remember you said something, and it really made me mad. It really upset
Good.
me.
I'm glad it made you mad.
Yeah, it really.
What was that?
Well, you said that these diseases are not druggable; they are foodable.
That's correct.
And being a food ontologist, I am pissed off that I did not come up with that phrase. That you beat me to it, and I'm really. It's really bothering me. I should have been the first one to say that. So,
well, in my book Metabolic, I basically make the case that the diseases that we are currently treating, the chronic metabolic diseases, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian disease, are not diseases. They are symptoms of disease. And those symptoms you can treat with medicine, but the disease is still there. It's like giving an aspirin to a patient with a brain tumor because they have a headache. Might help the headache, ain't going to do a damn thing for the brain tumor. All right? So statins for high LDL. The high LDL is not the disease. High LDL is the symptom of the disease. The high blood pressure is not the disease. It's a manifestation of the endothelial dysfunction that's going on underneath. So you can lower the blood pressure. I'm not arguing you can, but then the question is, what are you going to do to reverse the endothelial dysfunction? Because that's going to give you a heart attack anyway, et cetera, et cetera. The point is that there are 8 subcellular pathologies that are going on underneath all of these chronic metabolic diseases. And I'll just list them real quick. They are glycation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, insulin resistance, membrane instability, inflammation, methylation, and autophagy. Now, if you look at the molecular mechanisms of each of those 8, and I have, There is no drug target for any of them, which is why we haven't solved any of these, because there's no medicine for this. There's no pill for this, because you can't get the pill to where the problem is. The only thing that gets there is food. The problem is that real food gets the medicine, if you will, the actual nutrients, the chemicals that make the difference. Processed food actually does the opposite. It poisons them. In the case of sugar, for instance, it poisons mitochondria. It poisons mitochondria 3 ways. It poisons it by inhibiting AMP kinase. It poisons it by inhibiting ACAD-L, acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain, and it also inhibits carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1. So sugar is a mitochondrial toxin. Now, how are you going to make your mitochondria work better with a medicine? Ain't gonna happen.
Right.
So food is medicine only if it's real food. Processed food is poison. And the problem is that that's what everyone's eating. So all this other stuff that we are talking about is sort of pretty much irrelevant if we don't actually fix the food itself, irrespective of what personalized nutritional information we give to people. Now, the question is, can you fix that and nudge people in the right direction? Well, through procurement, you can. And that's why we developed this paradigm. Because if the insurance company will pay for the food, but only real food, and if you buy processed food, you have to pay for it yourself. You have the liberty to go do it, but you have the impetus, you have the inducement to actually purchase and procure and consume real food because you actually get it paid for. And the insurance company's happy to do it because they get to keep the profit. They get to keep the difference.
Right. I think that's a great business model, not only for insurance, but even for programs like SNAP.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As far as I'm concerned, this is where you start, is
right.
Friggin' SNAP.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. You're also supporting my thesis. For those who are unfamiliar with the concept of singularity, this was Ray Kurzweil's idea that there will be a grand intelligence that is more intelligence than humans or machines when we become one with artificial intelligence. And I've been saying for the last few years that singularity will happen through food. And we keep hearing about exponential medicine. We keep hearing, but until we know food, we won't really be at that singularity point because it's just essential for our being. We are what we eat in that.
No, I disagree.
Oh, good.
I couldn't disagree with you more.
Oh,
we are not what we eat. Okay. I used to say when I wrote Fat Chance, my first book, we are what we do with what we eat. We are what we metabolize.
Yeah,
and in fact, I think Ifrik would agree with that. And now, based on what I've learned over the last 8 years about what the food industry has done and what they've known and when they knew it, which is why I had to write this book, I actually have changed that. It's we are what they did with what we did.
Well, okay, you win. I'm not gonna. At least partially, right? Like, because we're not. I only consume part of my diet from the food industry, and I've got a big garden in my backyard. So I'm not just what they do.
That's why you're doing well, and the rest of us are dying.
We've got a question from Carial69, wondering whether this is ever going to make it into public school health class books so our children can understand why it's important to make healthy food choices. Afric, I'm going to pick on you because you're a dean at a university responsible for teaching kids, and maybe not at the public school level, but how do we get this down into that level? I've always been a fan. Maybe we should be teaching chemistry in the home ec class, right? Why don't we do that? How come that's not happening? Does that happen in Ireland at all?
I think things are changing. I think that some of what we're talking about, at least, is filtering down to the kind of school level. We recently had the most recent national survey of adolescents' food intakes was published last week here, and we are seeing changes over the past 10 years in children and adolescents' diet. So slight increases in fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, and more water, less sugary drinks, and things like that. So it's slowly creeping down. Another thing which feeds back to your first question as well, around what are the other things that we need to think about to build into these systems for personalization, is the whole sustainable food systems, and talking about sustainability of food supply. And with the greater focus on sustainability and climate change, that is filtering down into education programs in schools, and children are learning more about where their food is coming from. And so I think the combination of kind of what we're doing in the university from a food nutrition perspective, but also what colleagues are doing in environment and climate change, is definitely that there's a heightened awareness around where our food comes from, and how to make more healthy choices. And I think we're starting to see that in some of the dietary intake data, that certainly in Ireland. I don't know what the situation is like in the US when it comes to the education and what children are consuming at the moment, though.
Manali comments that, and I saw this in the news the other day, just to sort of reiterate kind of things that you're saying. Ronaldo, the famous soccer player, was being interviewed the other day, and evidently Coca-Cola is a big sponsor of soccer, and he pushed aside the Coke bottles and held up his water bottle.
I saw this today. Yeah, I saw this somewhere today. It cost I don't know, was it 4 billion or 4 million?
It was a B.
4 billion.
It was a B, and in share price drop. So I think, when we start seeing athletes and role models that kids look up to, I think that's another important part besides just what's going on in school.
If I can just break in here.
Yeah, please do.
There's education and there's implementation, and they're not the same.
Right.
You can educate till the cows come home, all the children, and it won't make a damn bit of difference if the parents continue to bring back the junk food in the store, because the kid doesn't have a say. So what we are doing here in the Bay Area, we have a curriculum to teach fourth graders how to cook, giving them the knife skills. We're actually using the cafeteria as an education center in order to be able to get kids to understand not just what's in the food, but what's been done to the food and how they can make the food, so that when they go to the store with their parent and they're in the produce aisle, the kid says, "Hey, there's an artichoke. I want that for dinner." And the mom says, "I don't know how to make an artichoke." But the kid says, "Yeah, but I do."
Yeah, nice.
And then the kid can be the positive disruptive force in the home to actually, change what is being procured and consumed. So we have to provide both, not just education, but implementation skills as well.
Robert, I'll just tell you that there's lots of interest in your support for your book in the YouTube chat happening right now. Just wanted to
glad to hear,
surface that. I'm looking forward to reading it. I haven't read it yet. Deborah, what about you? What are the next steps for the food knowledge graph? Do you see this project evolving? How do you see it moving forward?
And a rephrase of that is, where do you want this to go? Which is kind of what you asked initially. I mean, ultimately, I want my personal knowledge graph accessible, on my phone, so that, like, I've got a methylation mutation. How does that means I should have methylated folate if I take a supplement, but how does that impact what kind of food choices I make? So, and actually, I don't have a smart toilet. I don't know how pervasive they are in the United States, but
they don't exist yet.
Okay, but they do exist, I think, in Japan. They do exist.
Well, kind of, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's the pee on the stick thing. So, if I want data-driven recommendations that are personalized to me, that are personalized to my known medical conditions, that are personalized to the biomarkers that you can get to, that are personalized to my preferences, that might be personalized to what's in my smart fridge. I have a semi-smart fridge, but they're getting smarter. And that might work into my garden. I've got a giant garden that, is all organic. So, and make it easy for me. So maybe give me the recommendations too. I haven't cooked an artichoke in a long time, but remind me how long or how easy it is, and make that available in devices that I can get to. And actually, Food On is open, and actually Food On includes the field to fork aspect. So we don't use it right now in our application, but I want to do provenance all the way through. I want to support like the small farmer and maybe the minority owned farmer down the street, and complement it with my garden and personalized to me. And I think personal health knowledge graphs are part of the future. That there's a background knowledge graph in the cloud that everybody can get to that might include data from our previous speakers, because I want that data. And then I've got the personal stuff. Like maybe I don't want to broadcast to the world what kind of medical conditions I have, but I want the recommendations to be filtered by that.
Mm-hmm.
So in my academic world, I want this all open. In my consulting world, I'm happy to make pieces that have intellectual property that, that somebody can make. You got to have a sustainable model that somebody can make money off of to support the work. So I think there's public-private partnerships options here as well. And then also another one of our projects that's funded by DARPA is a food sustainability project for what's threatening food supplies internationally. And we could bring that into the conversation as well.
Great. Well, it's heartens, being a co-founder of Food On, it heartens me that you're, you see its importance. And in fact, Courtney and I are both deeply involved in food system ontologies, specifically around sustainability issues, their indicators and stuff. So I think that's absolutely important so that we can not just make food recommendations to people for them, but also recommendations that are ultimately good for the planet, and not going to be causing environmental degradation as a result of those recommendations. We are actually a little bit over time. So I just want to Courtney, did you have any last thoughts here?
I really like the way the conversation's going, of being able to overlay kind of the food system knowledge graph with the personalized health knowledge graph, and bringing those together, I think, is an important next step, because those worlds have been very separate in the past, and our work in particular is trying to help bridge that. But the fact that everyone else is thinking that way as well is, I think, a really important impetus. So.
Great. Well, to our virtual audience and to our guests, I would just like to extend a great thank you. And it's nice to see such an interactive audience, really fantastic. And, we've got such wisdom here in the room, and looking forward to future conversations and collaborations with each one of you.
And don't forget to see Damien, who popped up to questions there, and any of our previous episodes. They're all there on the YouTube channel to watch whenever you can and have a chance, and just subscribe to know when all the other ones come on up.
Yes, and you too can stay in the know.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.